All right, well, welcome. My name is Jeff Schuman, for those that don't know me. Hopefully everybody does. And today we're going to talk about GitHub Actions for a little bit. Let me click on the old present mode over here. Okay, so intro to GitHub Actions. We're going to talk a little bit about CI and CD, and let's just dive right in. So here's our purpose and the agenda for this tech topic. In 2021, so the beginning of this year, we, meaning Solution Street, and more specifically myself with a lot of Dylan, assumed technical ownership of a new client web app in the financial technology or fintech business called ArenaPay. In general, ArenaPay helps small to mid-sized businesses by acting almost like their accountant or their accounting department, making their payments for them, and basically centralizing their float to make sure that they're taking the most advantage of their float as they can in terms of paying out to people they owe and taking in money from people that owe them. They have a lot of grandiose plans for the application, but it's relatively simple right now. The technology that's in use for ArenaPay is Node, both on the client and the server side, with React on the front end. We're using GraphQL database, which is very interesting, over Apollo. We use semantic UI for the front-end styling for the most part. We used Krakow, which is a layer on top of the Create React application starter app that you would find out there. And it's using Lerna, which is a package management technique, I would call it, for Node packages, and AWS for hosting, among other things. While we are supporting that application, we discovered that it also made use of, now again, we took over the technical ownership of this application from another company that was doing it. And so in taking it over, we've been learning a lot. They made they made pretty much all of the technical choices with building the application, and we're trying to come up to speed on a lot of them. And one of the things we learned is that they're using GitHub Actions for CI and CD. So we needed to learn a little bit about that to support them. And in general, I think we found it a pretty interesting tool to use. So I wanted to share that knowledge of what I've learned and hopefully pique interest in others who might use GitHub in their applications, either personal or professional, or might find themselves with needing to talk to a client about the possible option of using it. You know, I'm no expert in DevOps by a long shot. I just have been around a while, so I know a lot about it to a certain extent, and I know what works. And I've been exposed to a bunch of different, exposed to a bunch of different CI/CD tools, and I found this one was pretty straightforward and somewhat powerful. So I wanted to share what it's all about. So we'll do a brief introduction of CI/CD, and I encourage others, if I get something wrong, please correct me. We'll do an introduction to GitHub Actions. I'll show some things in a demo, and then we'll have a discussion. So let's dive in. So what is CI, or continuous integration? So this is sort of the textbook definition. Continuous integration is the practice of automating the integration of code changes from multiple contributors into a single software project. So in general, it's merging your code into a central repository, and we often make these merges dependent on certain things, on a successful build, whatever that means, on passing tests, whatever that means in the context of your particular project, and perhaps even some syntax or linting checks. Pull requests and code reviews are integral in this workflow of continuous integration. And obviously, and hopefully many of you have already seen the benefits of continuous integration, where you have enhanced team communication via having to make sure people are reviewing your code, a more stable code base because tests are passing, and development team scaling, where now you can have multiple developers on board in the same project, all contributing and knowing that the code that's making it into your primary repository, your main branch, it has passed tests at the very least, it builds successfully and can conform to any code guidelines that you may set up. So what about CD, the CD part? So there's kind of two pieces to this, continuous delivery and continuous deployment. And definitionally speaking, continuous delivery is the process of deploying code changes to a testing and or production environment, and in this case, something that requires some manual intervention. That doesn't mean it can't be a script that's run, but in general, continuous delivery refers to somebody pushing the button, somebody going ahead and saying, okay, it's every other Friday and it's 5 o'clock and we're about to deliver our code. Let's go ahead and start the process and go ahead and go. Versus continuous deployment is the complete automation of those deployments. So what do we get with sort of both of these flavors of CD? We remove deployment complexity because hopefully we've centralized all that complexity into a script that can be run. The script might be complex, but the actual act of deploying is not. We can have more frequent releases because there's low overhead to a release. Hopefully, because you've been using CI, you've got a stable repository, and you can more frequently release your product without much overhead. And, you know, again, this is a lot of theory here, but at least in theory, less risky releases, and things are easier to fix because you have smaller batches of changes because you're releasing more frequently. So more frequent releases means you have smaller batches of changes that are going in. You don't have one monolithic version 2.0 going in with everything that's been worked on in the last year or 2 years. Okay, so now we have sort of a basis in understanding a little bit. There are a lot of popular CI/CD tools. I might have missed one or two that you know about, but that's okay. Azure Pipelines from Microsoft, Circle CI, Travis CI, Bitbucket, and GitLab both have kind of their versions of what we're talking about today. In fact, I've just more recently been looking at some GitLab scripts that have been written, and they're kind of similar to GitHub Actions. So I think GitHub Actions might have been somewhat of a response to how GitLab set things up. And Jenkins is an extremely popular CI/CD DevOps tool. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more and focusing on GitHub Actions. So what are some of the features? It's fully integrated with GitHub repositories, as you might expect. Totally free. From what I can tell, you really don't need any kind of different GitHub subscription or account to use GitHub Actions. From what I can tell, there is a cap on the number of, let's call it cycles that are used by your GitHub Actions. Interestingly enough, I tried to look at what their monitor tool and how to see, you know, how much am I using when I'm writing some of mine. No matter what I did, it always just said I didn't really have any action at all, so it must be a pretty high cap from my perspective. But I could see where if you had a complicated workflow that you've developed and you used it day after day with many developers, where you might have to keep an eye on that cap they have set. It helps you to automate software workflows. It's event-driven, so you know different events, and we'll see some of these, but creating a pull request, completing a pull request, those are a couple of examples of the events that can kick off one of these workflows. There's a marketplace for the actions that you write, so you can create your own actions, or you can go out there and try to find in the community actions that other people have created. And I actually have an example in my demo of an action someone else created that I'm using. So you can see where it can be used for CI and CD and a lot more, and I'll get into some of that in the demo. And the upper right there, that's the little icon, that's the GitHub Actions icon. So in case on the previous screen, I didn't include it, but if you see that, you know, that little blue sort of workflow, that's what they use. Okay, so how do you use GitHub Actions? Well, basically, you store the actions in your repository under the .github/workflows directory. And again, we'll see a lot of different demo. It's all written in YAML. And again, the GitLab workflow tool also writes in YAML. So if you haven't had any experience in YAML, it's a markup language. It's relatively simple to learn and use. Nothing complicated or complex really there. It can be a little fussy, I will say. I definitely, in using the GitHub Actions stuff, had on at least more than one occasion, had an issue where my YAML was just not indented or written correctly, and it was yelling at me. So basically the way it's set up is there's an event that you define that what kicks off your action. There are jobs, multiple jobs you can have within one action. I think for the most part I kept it in the demo to a single job per action, and then a bunch of steps that you run. And so where do these actions run? Well, they run on virtual machines that are running at GitHub. And from what I can tell, they have 3 different types of VMs that you can select. Windows servers, Ubuntu, and Mac OS, interestingly enough. I've honestly just tried out the Ubuntu side, but they definitely have that listed as other options. And again, you can grab your actions from the Actions Marketplace and use those. So here are just some examples I kind of thought about and have seen used of what you can do with GitHub Actions. So you can build and execute your tests. And what's interesting here is because you can define different VMs that they can be used on, your actions can run asynchronously and in parallel on different VMs. So you can run your Ubuntu, Mac OS, and Windows tests all at the same time. Notifications, so you can send out emails. You can notify when something happens, like, hey, there was a pull request, and it was assigned to you. You can create Docker images and deploy to AWS. That's actually one of the things that happens in the ArenaPay GitHub Actions. You can create releases in quotes, there from GitHub. So the typical GitHub release, you can do that in an action. You can tag commits, and I have that in the, and we'll hit a couple of the 2 or 3 of these with the demo there. Those are just some examples. Hey, it's time for the demo. Cool. Live demo. Let's see if I mess it up. Okay. So, bear with me for 1 second. So the first thing that I wanted to show is this is the application that I've written. It's nothing fancy, obviously. It's a calculator. Let me actually bring it up in Visual Studio Code. Let me move it over to the visible window. So it's a Node application called Calculator. Oh, okay. And you see we have a couple of scripts, which one's it just runs the index.js file, and a test script that runs our jest tests. Let's say that 10 times fast. And the only package we have right now is the jest package for running tests. So as you can see on the left-hand side, we've got different modules for adding 2 numbers, dividing 2 numbers, multiplying, and subtracting. Our index file just logs something out to the log. It doesn't actually perform anything. And our tests are all stored as separate tests for add, divide, multiply, and subtract. And so if I come here, and I believe I've already run my npm install, I think I can just say npm run tests. Hopefully they all pass right now. Okay, they all pass. Isn't that great? One other thing to notice is that I've got an NVMRC file here. For those of you, maybe if you've used Rails before, there's RVM. This is NVMRC, and it basically specifies the version of Node that I want to use with this project. It's usually a good idea to try to standardize on a particular version of Node for a project you're working on in Node, and this is the way I've decided to do it. So when I go into this directory, and I should be able to say node version 12.16.1. Let's say, oops, sorry, sorry. Oh, I don't have it installed. Okay, even better. That's even better. Okay, good. Because what we're going to do is we're going to show how we can make the GitHub action use the .mvmrc file that we have listed in our repository. So, give myself a pass for that. So if we look up here in GitHub, you'll see there's a folder up here called Actions. I'm sorry, not a folder, a tab called Actions. And right now, it's empty. They have some suggested ones, but we'll be building our own. So once we build our own actions, you're going to see them show up here. One other thing to see is that my master branch is, oh, I thought I locked it down. Okay, we are going to have our master branch locked down and only be updated via pull request. So what I'm going to do is locally, I'm going to create our first GitHub action. So let me go ahead and I cheated a little bit. I'm not going to write these from scratch. I'm just going to get them from another project that I have. Okay, I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to create a new folder called oops, there already is .github, sorry. Oh, maybe not. Okay. Before we do anything, okay, so now we're in the Actions 1 branch. Go to GitHub Workflows, create a new one, and going to call this one Simple Node. Okay, let me grab this, and then I'm going to grab the action, and we'll talk about it. Okay. Yeah, I should put that to that. So it's just Simple Node. Okay. So what am I saying here? So here's the name of the action that'll show up in GitHub, and here's the event that I want it to act upon. So when a pull request is created, this workflow is going to be kicked off. We only have one job set up here, and the name of the job is called Node Setup. I gave it that name. This is the VM that it's going to run on. And then here are the steps that are going to happen. So it's a list, therefore there's the dashes, right? So uses. So uses is basically the name of the action that we're invoking. So again, it can be something that the people at GitHub created. It could be one that's written by somebody else, but every action has a name and a version. So checkout v2 just means check out the branch locally on this VM for a later step. The next one, I actually gave it a name. The name is optional, and I called it Setup Node.js Environment. I'm going to use the setup node action, which takes in a variable called the node version. I'm going to give it node version 14. And I'm going to install my packages and call an npm install. So I'm just going to I'm just going to wait on this for just a second so we can take a quick look at this action, and then I'm going to commit this change, and I'm going to push it. Okay. So I have to make sure. Oops. Okay, so good. Got our file, simple node YAML set up. Okay. Oh. Okay. So now that that's happened, don't have any actions yet. Actions. One. I'm not sure if it shows up until I actually create the pull request. So let's create the pull request. So here's my simple node. So this is now the action screen. So what is it showing me here? It's saying, okay, here's all the workflows that you have defined. You notice we made one called simple node. And here it is. Here's a simple node action, and it's currently running. Okay, completed. I can click on this. It shows me the jobs that are a part of this action. There's only one job. It's called node setup. Now it's showing me basically a log. So if I look at So it installed node 14.16.0 because we told it to install node 14. So it's running it's installing the version of node 14 that it has. Installing packages, it should run an npm install. Okay. And then it has some cleanup. So relatively simple, nothing all that complicated right now for this pull request. So let's go ahead and complete this pull request. Perfect. Let me make sure I go back here and I'm on my meeting. So that was sort of the simplest one right there. Does anybody, before I move on to the next one, does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. Let's move on to something a little more interesting. And for this next one, we are going to try to read from our NVMRC file and use that to define which version of Node we actually install. I just need to make sure I'm up to date, so let's come back here. And I'm going to say, go back to main. Hit pull, we've got this now. And now let's say git checkout -b NVMRC action. Okay. And let me go back to Visual Studio Code. Quick flows. Let's create a new one. And we'll call it NVMRC node.vm. Okay. Let me grab this one from my, so it's a little more interesting. Okay, so the name is better, NVMRC. There we go. Again, when a pull request is created, a lot of this is the same, but here's where it starts to become different. We're defining a couple of environment variables. And we set up a default node version. So 12.16.1 said if, and we'll see how this is used in a second. But in general, let's for now just think of these environment variables, two strings, default node version, and use NVMRC, which I currently have set to false. So again, we're checking out our code. And we're going to do a bunch of steps, but they all have conditionals associated with them. And I looked, there's no real concept of an if-else with GitHub Actions, which is a little frustrating. So you kind of have to just repeat yourself or use the opposite of a particular condition to fall into a step. So what this is saying is the name of my step is set up Node.js environment with the environment variable if, so it only runs this step, it only is going to run this step if my use NVMRC is false. In other words, I'm not going to use NVMRC, so now it's going to say, okay, use the setup node step, and the node version is, and this is it's probably familiar to anybody that uses sort of templating languages in general, this is the templating language they use. It's a little wonky, but you get the environment variable by saying env default node version. So if using NVMRC is false, then it's going to install node version 12.16.1. Okay, here's my step that starts getting into if my use NVMRC is true. So again, there's no real else. It's just, hey, here's another step and here's the condition for it. So if use NVMRC is true, what this statement is this is the way you set basically an output variable from your step. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to cat the NVMRC locally, and I'm going to be putting it into a variable called NVMRC underscore version. So it's this guy. We use the set output command. The ID here is your unique ID of the step. Doesn't use a name, it uses this ID field. And we'll see how we put all this together in the next step, where we're saying, again, if use NVMRC is true, then we're going to set up node with the node version, and then here you can see we say steps NVM, so steps NVM uses the ID, outputs, so it's the output variable, and then the output variable NVMRC. So it's going to, all of this is going to grab the string that's defined in our NVMRC file. And then our last step just installs packages. So right now, when I push this, because use NVMRC is false, it should install the node version 12.16.1 with my GitHub action associated with the pull request. Then I'll come back in here, I'll update this to true, we'll run it through again, and we'll see that it should install whatever we have in NVMRC, which is 14.15.5. Let's go ahead and do that. So this, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come in and I'm going to remove the simple node YAML file. Leaving this wouldn't cause any problems. It would run both of those actions in parallel, but there's just no need right now since we're building upon this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this file. I'll let you know you can get it. So yeah, git add. Shoot. Okay, so git oh shoot. Let me see if I just can make this. Let's do it via. There we go. So confusing. Got to add and delete. Okay. Okay, so I've pushed that. So let's come back here, the NVMRC action. So let's create a pull request for that. Okay. Now it doesn't yet, I think because it's pulling kind of a combination of master and your branch, it doesn't yet know that I removed simple node, but you can note that only the NVMRC action is running. Oh, that's right. I didn't change. So again, this is just to keep piling on the confusion. Node setup is the name of the job. Didn't change that. So it's the same job name in the NVMRC workflow. So it completed. So what we can see here is these check marks say this step was run. These steps were not run because of the conditional that I had set for it. So if I open this, we can see that it is downloading 12.16.1 and it installed 12.16.1. So if we look back again, 12.16.1. So success. Let's go ahead and change this to true. Push that change. Okay, we're pushing that change, which the new change should trigger, triggers another run of my actions. And again, when you look at a pull request, it actually shows you when there's an action running in queue. So let's see. Okay, now we can see the opposite is in play here. It did not run setup node with the environment variable. It read the node version from NVMRC. So let's see if it shows us what it did. Yeah, it's not, the logging is not great, I will admit, but it at least shows what it's running, but it also shows what the current environment variables are. And let's see. Here we go. Acquiring 14.15.5. So it used this version, the NVMRC version, to install it. Okay, all well and good. Sounds great. We've got our correct version of Node now being installed that we want to be installed on the VM. Okay, so for the next one, actually, let me come back in here. Interesting. I'm not sure why it's stuck here. But neither here nor there. Oh, it was done. Sorry, it was just the login that was done. Let's go ahead and complete that one just to clean up after ourselves. We will come back in here. Pull. And so for the next one I'm going to show off, we're going to run our tests. Okay, so we're going to integrate running our tests into the pull request. So let's go ahead and create a branch. Call test run. Come back into Visual Studio Code. And let me grab my kind of a cheater version of the workflow. Sorry, bear with me for 1 second. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a new workflow file. We'll call it tests. No. Oh, 36. Trying to keep an eye on that time. All right, so this is a relatively simple one. Again, I've kind of gone back a step and I've said, you know what, we don't need to necessarily worry about which version of Node, at least for this test. We're just going to set up version 14. And the new piece here after we install packages, pretty simple, run tests, npm run tests, just like I did locally. So let's go ahead and push this guy. Actually, to oh, my dot's in the wrong place, darn it. Okay. And okay, we'll go back here. That's our code. Actions are running. Now, again, all my tests are passing, which is good, but I'm going to show what happens when we break our tests. Let's let this go. While that's happening, I am going to go ahead and break my tests. So let's take add. Create speed. Plus one. That's not going to run, right? If we run it locally, and it's failing, just like we would expect. Here, my tests ran successfully, so if I look at my run tests, it shows pretty similar to what I see locally. It shows all the tests passing. But let's now go ahead and break our tests. So pull request. Okay. And checks haven't completed. Okay, got a failure. There's an error. Come back. Tells me that my action failed. Go to my pull request. Those checks have failed. Now, it's still letting me merge because I don't have my policy set up right now against my main branch saying don't allow the merge request if there's any of the failures on any of the checks. But you can see how that would be fairly trivial to do, and then you won't be able to merge. So now the user can see, oh, I've got a failure in my unit tests. I need to fix these before I move on. Okay? So I would go back, I would fix, yada, yada, yada. For now, I'm just not going to complete this merge request. Or pull request. Sorry, I've been using GitLab too much. GitLab, they call them merge requests, in case you didn't know. But so I'm kind of context switching. It gets me every time. So let's go back to master. Oops. Oh, sorry. Old terminology. Caught. And we're going to now tag our commits. So this is actually something we just are taking advantage of now. We added in the ArenaPay app, where whenever we merge into on that application, our master branch, we're actually tagging using semantic versioning. So this is also going to show the use of an action that I grabbed from the marketplace. So let's go ahead and grab come in here and create a new workflow. We'll call it tag. And then come back and get okay. So call this one tag. Now this one is not acting on a pull request. This action is going to take place when I push to a branch or merge to a branch, push code to a branch. And in this case, I've specified which branch or branches I want this action to run on. And I've just said only on the main branch. So when I push to the main branch, when I pull request to the main branch, what we're going to do is, now here we're not doing anything with Node. We're just getting all the code. And in all honesty, I'm not sure if this one's really needed. I'd have to check if I need this. But anyway, what I'm going to do is the name or the description of my step is bump the version and push tag. Now this is an example of a marketplace action that someone created, which is a tag action. If you go to the GitHub page for that action, he has a lot of options you can set. You do have to set a GitHub token, which there is already, this secret is already there. You don't have to set the secret up. It's like it's a token you use to confirm access. And then with V, that just means I'm going to put a V in front of the tag. That's all. Now the good thing about this this action is that by default, it will bump my minor version of my tag. So what does that mean? It means if I'm already on version 2.1, it will bump to 2.2. But you can use commits to bump other versions. So, for example, let's go ahead and just get this one going, first of all. Here we are. And so let's git what I do want is I want to git remove. I just don't want things to be slow. So I want to get rid of the NVMRC. Okay, so here we are. Let's come back here to code. Now we have this guy. Now when I create this pull request, there shouldn't be any actions that run. This one's supposed to be failure. But I didn't have an action in this branch that runs off of a pull request being created. What I can do then is I can merge. Now that I've merged, go back to actions. We can see that now my tag action is being run. It's the only job running here. Look at it. That's it. Yada yada. I think this doesn't keep up. It still says it's here, but I don't think it is. Yeah, it's done. So if I look, and I look at the log, new tag right here, 0.1.0. Okay, so if I come back locally, and I go back to the main branch, oh, you see I've got version 0.1.0, and it was assigned right here like that. Now what happens if I come in here, let me just put a comment in. What I'm going to do is, so let me try to get my syntax correctly here. I come here and I say, this is a major change. Oh. Come back here. Okay. And I think I need to go to my branch. And merge it. So now it's going to, now what should happen is it should recognize that one of the commits in the pull request, one of the commits being pushed to the main branch, contains that keyword major, and it should push the major version number. Similarly, you could put in, I believe it's patch, and it will push the patch version number. So if you're doing something like a Git flow workflow, you could have your release branch, and you could add a commit there. That's if you're ready to commit, version 3.0 of your product, you could just make sure one of your commits has major in there. And I think if there's a conflict, if one has minor and one has major, then it's going to use the highest level of major to tag the commit. Okay, looks like it's done. Let's see what happens here. Done version. Oh, it did not work. Interesting. Okay. I've seen this work in the past. So I'm not 100% sure why it did not work this time. But I'll have to double check. And what's nice is, here I can show, one other thing I can show, there's actually an editor. So if I go to code, go to GitHub workflows, and I click on this action, say edit. Yeah, it knows it's a GitHub action, It's kind of interesting. Here's the marketplace. So here's how you could pick a marketplace item. So I could go to, let's see, if you click on it, what you do is let's say I just want to go to a new. No? Yeah. It kind of helps you in, it doesn't have a lot of the options, but it helps you in actually putting in the action into your file. So see how it gave me the name, it gave me the users, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty sure. My problem. Needed to do hash major. So user error. We all knew that was the case, though. That was my fault. So I wonder, I hate to have a demo just not work at all. See it again. Okay. Then we need to complete it. Action. There it is. While that's happening, I'll talk about the last demo I'm going to do, which is notifications. So we can, obviously I found another action in the marketplace that will email users. And specifically, my demo is going to be of emailing a user when a PR is opened. So let's just double check this guy. It's done. Version, here we go. New tag version 1.0.0. So it worked. Super. Let's go back to my command line here and git check out name. Goal. Check out pay. Git check out OSB. Notify. All notify. Let's get my example. And let's go back to the Studio Code. Here, we'll create a new one. We'll call it notify.yml. Notify. Okay, so again, on a pull request being created, and we have our job. We can name our job anything we want. Here we named it send email. This is the action that I kind of found in the marketplace. You give it your server address. Now, here's a use of GitHub secrets. Okay, so if I go back to GitHub, I go to settings. Secrets. I have already put in my Gmail password and username here in the secrets, and I don't think you can see them from here. You only can update. So it's like once you put them in. I'm a trusting person, I guess. So they've got my username and password. And that's one of the options. Your subject, PR opened, and here's the body of my email, and who am I sending it to? So that's a personal email address, and who am I sending it from? So relatively simple. So let's go ahead. Again, this kind of shows that this with is basically all the properties of the particular step or action that you're using.
Hey, Jeff, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you know how well this would integrate with, I guess, your pull? For instance, if you had default reviewers, could you customize this email with or?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain you can. Like, I've hard-coded all this, obviously, in terms of who it's going to. But what
Right.
you probably could do in a previous step is go to the pull. Well, yes, go to the pull request, see who the pull request assigns as reviewers, grab that string of who the reviewers were, and then put it into this too. I'm not 100% sure because I've never done that, but I get the feeling like you could. Like, you could go to the PR and get anything you needed off of the PR.
Okay. Wow, that's really cool.
Right. So from the previous step, you would go and you would set one of those output variables equal to who the PR was assigned to as reviewers. You might have to manipulate it with, like, putting comma separated, etc. I think it's possible. Yes. I think it's not as trivial as what I'm doing here, which is hard coding it. But I'd be surprised if you couldn't do that.
I like that a lot. That's really neat.
Okay, so let's see if this works. Here, okay. Let's create a pull request. Actions. Notify workflow added. That's the commit. So it's basic. By the way, it's showing you. I know this is kind of confusing because I used all the same terminology. It's showing you the commit that the action was queued off of. Hopefully that makes sense. I've got my email. See if I got one. Hey, look. So, hooray, I got the email from my Gmail account. So, hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of taste of what you can do with some of the GitHub actions. Really, the rest of the 5 minutes was meant to sort of be a brief discussion of what other tools similar to this people have used, and where they could see perhaps the GitHub Actions piece being not as it's not terribly complicated as you can see, but it can be useful. So, does anybody else have any thoughts on this versus other things they've used, etc.?
Hey, Jeff, I have a couple of questions about actions. The first one that runs on, how is that linked to the VM? Like, if it's a remote VM, or like how is that set up? It's just a name.
Right. So if you go to, let's see, oh, this is not what I'm looking for. Sorry. Yeah. Here we go. So full disclosure, this is probably one of my, I'm not sure I know the answer to your question, Bill.
Okay.
But in general, they do have a lot of documentation of what the runners are and what these running environments are, of what you can check. Are you looking because you'd want to be able to then, like, shell script into it later, or?
I was just curious, like, if you look at the API, it just has, like, runs on, and you pick one of these environments, but I didn't know, like, how flexible or adaptable or configurable that was. Is it always their environments, or can you pick your own environments?
I want to say that I believe I came across that you could use your own environment, but I'm not 100% sure. So
gotcha.
These are virtual environment Windows Server.
Yeah. So those are like their environments, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
It just gave you one. But what if I had a...
Yep, right here. So
I wanted to run on.
Probably this is the most I saw, which was, hosting your own runners. Yeah, you can. So.
Cool. All right, so that's capable. That's capable of it. Okay, and then the last one is are there like kind of like most other CI/CD tools or deployment tools that have some sort of recipe that's like, here's your typical thing you want, and then you kind of go from there. This one looks like bottoms up. You're just taking things one at a time. But is there like a big master action recipe that most people start with and then tweak?
Right. So I think the best you're going to get is when I went to, you can create these workflows actually online. And as you can see, it has some workflows sort of determined here. I'm not sure it has exactly what you're talking about, except for the fact that you probably can go, and I think you can go online to various third parties, and there'll be people who said, here's my workflow that I did for running, you know, my node server and running all of my Jest tests, you know, like, I think it just has very simplified stuff, like it says here. Set up this workflow. Yeah, it's not too bad.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like they have kind of like templates, I guess I would call it.
Sounds good.
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. I don't want to go much past one. Has anybody had experience using the GitLab version of this?
Yes, I have used GitLab. It's very similar. This is Jada. So
yep.
It's very similar to this GitHub Actions.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what they based this on, because like I said, our another project I'm working on right now uses GitLab, and it looks like it's very, very similar in how they set up their workflows.
It has the same, the steps concept, and then different environments you can set up different things to run.
Cool. Yeah, so it's kind of, if you learn one or the other, you probably are 90% of the way to learning the other one. Yeah. Cool. Okay, like I said, my purpose here was to sort of pique interest, to say, hey, you know, I might not use this to do some full-blown CI/CD setup, but my project that I have on GitHub could probably do some tagging every now and then when I push to the main branch, or I can notify myself when someone else creates a PR for this repository, or I'll run my tests every time a pull request gets created. And you can lock down, take my word for it, I didn't do it here, but you can lock down your branch so a PR cannot be completed unless all the tests that are running properly in your actions complete successfully. We have that set up in ArenaPay right now. So. All right, well, thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day and a good weekend.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.